Yes, it's about 30 minutes north of Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I think the show airs in Ogden, Utah. But now the thing is, that's not like a bizarre town or a weird town. That's a pretty stable town. I know people from there. How were they able to stay under the radar doing all this craziness?
You know, that was the other odd thing about this case, was if you think about most of these cults,
Yeah.
they go and find a place out in the woods or someplace where they're away from everything. This guy masterfully built it right in the middle of a neighborhood, and he was slowly taking over a neighborhood. They purchased up 11, I think, homes within this small little cul-de-sac area. There was only one way in and one way out. And they had these incredibly landscaped yards compared to the rest of the neighborhood. They just stood out like sore thumbs. Everything about it didn't make sense because everything about it drew attention to them, and yet they remained under the radar.
Fascinating. And they were stockpiling weapons as well?
So during the course of the investigation, we heard all kinds of testimony that there was a doomsday mentality within the group. So there was the collection of automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons. There was the collection of ammunition being talked about. Now, we didn't know this for sure. And then, of course, there was discussion about food storage and medical supplies and items they'd stolen from emergency rooms, like pregnancy crash cart items and other kinds of things, so they could take care of home births. And then, of course, we heard of a library that was stocked with books on bomb making and marksmanship, and then, of course, general scholastic kinds of or academic kinds of things, because they were homeschooling their children. So as we investigated the case, we started to unravel all of these different tentacles that caused a great amount of concern for law enforcement.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now, how do you investigate something like this? You have one person comes in, a victim comes into you and says, hey, there's something crazy going on over here in these houses, right? But what can you do? You go knock on the door? What do you do next?
Yeah, well, but because there was so much at risk, we couldn't just go knock on doors. So one of the first things that I did was I started to try to disprove her, to see if there were holes in her story. And you know, I mean, it's really important when you're dealing with victims of crime that they know that you believe them, that they believe something happened. But then your responsibility is this something that really can be validated and corroborated with other kinds of evidence? And, you know, we talk all the time in law enforcement about the fact that we can't build cases on any single form of evidence. And here I had some incredibly powerful eyewitness testimony. I was there. I was participating. I saw. But nonetheless, she could have been as wacky as a jaybird. And so I had to also then start going out and saying, now what can I corroborate with other kinds of information? And as her story unfolded, there became bits and pieces away from the group that I could use to corroborate the story. Things like at times the children were taken out and for lack of a better term, prostituted to people in the community, to be able to go out and find the men that were involved and that sexually assaulted those children with the adult women in the group, corroborated her stories. And so you start adding on. Now I have multiple eyewitnesses, and then I have physical evidence that I can look at, and circumstantial evidence. And so that, as you start putting the case together, starts putting all the puzzle pieces out on the table. And then, of course, you start assembling them. And you're no stranger to investigations. I mean, it's just a matter of getting in and working your guts out.
Now once again, Ogden, Utah is such a small town, so they were able to prostitute these children to men in the town?
Well, and there were only 2 counts that we ever were aware of, and that I was able to get confessions of the 2 men that sexually assaulted the children. But in those cases, the thing that's interesting is, keep in mind, now Ogden's a population of about 87,000.
Right.
within a community of about 280,000. So it's while it is by standards of our major cities in the country a small city, it's large enough that you can get lost in the woodwork, and they were effectively lost in the woodwork.
Okay, and this, he was a landscaper, right? Did he have contracts with big, powerful people in town?
Yeah, that was another crazy thing, is this guy had designed some of the most beautiful landscape gardens in the county. Actually, the city and county building where the courts and the police department were located, and the county jail were not only designed by him but maintained by him. So he was no stranger in the community either. And then of course anyone who had money tried to hire him to do work in their homes, and of course in the very expensive homes of the city. He was often the landscaper who put together their landscaping.
So now, how was this cult funded? I guess there was some prostitution going on, but did they all work for the landscaping company?
Yeah, and so it's and the prostitution term is maybe inappropriate, because I don't know that we ever were able to show that money exchanged hands.
Gotcha.
As a result of that. But these adult women would take the children out. In my opinion, that's prostitution, whether there was gain of some kind, and it was usually either getting more members or something in trade for whatever that relationship was. But what was required in this cult and in many cults is that there obviously has to be a financial system in place, and it's rarely the leader of the group that is the worker bee. It's everyone else, and so these women, primarily uneducated women working hourly wage jobs, were working in hotels as cleaning staff or other things, were responsible for giving all of their money that they earned back to Arvin, this man in charge, who would then determine how it would be spent in the group. And of course, they were thrilled to do so, like many faiths are, to donate tithes, in effect, to the common good of their church. But in this case, the common good was Arvin and his designs.
Fascinating. But so now, if they're out there trying to recruit new people, there had to be some people who would turn them down, and wouldn't they go running to the cops and say, these people just tried to recruit me into this?
Well, yeah, but what are they going to run to the cops with? That became the challenge. There had been ghost stories and rumors abounding for years, primarily from estranged husbands whose wives had joined the group and taken their children and were cutting them off from visitation. Now, they didn't want male children in the group, and so many husbands were able to actually purchase their male children back from their wives and get court orders that gave them full custody of the children in exchange for, in one case, they said they were charged $10,000 to do this. But all in all, it still came down to civil transactions. Law enforcement doesn't mess with custody battles.
Yeah, but it must have come up in custody court. There must be court documents making these allegations, right?
Well, yeah, and then the allegations now, that was the other beauty of how he originally set this up, is they were living in different homes, and they would just purport, and when they would testify in any kind of civil hearings, they would say, we're just neighbors who like each other and have a love for gardening, and we get together to help with food storage and things to kind of help each other out. But they all, in fact, in the newspaper accounts that were written before the raid ever occurred, the allegations of a church being run out of that location were poo-pooed. In fact, there was no physical worship building or church, and they never practiced a worship service in any of the homes. So even though it was something that they called a church and a religion, there was no religion going on.
This is just incredibly fascinating. Okay, we are with Michael. Yeah. This is just unbelievable that all this was going on, and there was like 30 members of the cult. You said, right?
No, there were
30 children.
According to reports, 120-ish is the high number that we got. But there were 32 children living in the homes.
Incredible. And these kids, they weren't going to regular schools or anything like that, right?
No, they were all homeschooled, yeah.
And no doctor visits. Were they ever taken to doctors? Emergencies, broken leg?
Yeah, actually, that's interesting you'd bring that up, because that was one of the strategies. And, of course, in the book we explored into detail where the children, if they did get a cold, were sent to the county health department or to the Midtown clinic where they could get free care. And there, the adults would go in with them, and they would try to steal as much as possible from the shelves, tape and gauze and other kinds of things to stock up their supplies that they had in the basements of these homes. And then the medicines that were given to the children were stockpiled on the shelves. The children were never given those medicines. In fact, the victims who are in the book and who are talking about their experiences say how they just suffered as they allowed their body just to slowly develop the antigens to get through things, but they were never given the medicines because those were kept as part of the food storage and the end of days preparation storage that the cult kept.
Incredible. Like I said, we're talking with Michael R. King. He's the author of the book Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. He's the actual detective in charge of this case. And when we get to this, we're going to find out how he... So, Mike, how did you get enough evidence to actually get a warrant?
Well, you know, the county attorney on that first evening when I sat down with him and shared what I had learned, basically pulled me off of everything else that I was working. Frankly, Ed, I was hoping that he would give this to somebody who was trained in this kind of a thing and let me continue to buy stolen cars. And that wasn't the case. It launched me into a completely different direction in my career, as you might guess. But immediately I started working round the clock. One of the first things that I did is I went to the Ogden City Police Department and spoke with the police chief there, asking for one of his investigators, a guy who actually was my field training officer when I was a rookie many years earlier, and I thought was just one of the finest investigators I'd ever dealt with. And then together, he and I started interviewing as many people as we could find, knowing that we had a short fuse, because if these children were being sexually assaulted every single day, which was the report, then we couldn't afford to let this investigation last for months and months or years. Something had to be done immediately. It took literally 20-hour days for a month for us to keep a lid on this, not share with anyone what was going on because of the fear that they would destroy evidence, and put together enough information that we could go in and raid all of the homes and try to collect the pornography, the sexual training materials that they had, the devices, the automatic or semi-automatic weapons. And once I had the warrants in hand, then we started preparing for the raid.
Fascinating. And how'd you pull that off? Because you're in there with a bunch of automatic weapons and stuff. Do you have a SWAT team over there?
Yeah, I mean, it was a real concern for us. And, of course, when I went and laid the case out for the judge and asked for a no-knock search warrant, or the ability to go in and kick doors down and take people into custody immediately, the judge agreed that the risk to not only the people in the cult but to the officers was great, and the risk of losing evidence was so great that we were given a no-knock search warrant. So this is where it got kind of fun, as I, again, sat down with the police chief, and I asked for the SWAT team commander, who I had served under as a SWAT officer in the city, and I said I'd really like him to be the only one to know as we plan, because this was a Vietnam veteran, Green Beret. He was just a machine when it comes to managing an assault on a place, and together we started looking at how we would set up this raid. We eventually ended up calling in almost 70 police officers so that we could hit the 10 homes all at once. And